The Climate Action Network have actually been doing some monitoring in Wotton. We've got 4 or 5 volunteers who all feed their riverfly monitoring results into the BART and the Rivers Trust website. I know there are other people out there who are doing it outside of Cannes as well, and if people want to volunteer, please obviously do get in touch with BART. But actually, if you can let us know as well, because what we really want to do is produce a body of evidence or information that we can share with other people in Wotton about what's happening in our streams through Wotton. It is all done through the Army website, But there isn't actually very much local information in Wotton itself, through the town itself. And there are lots of sort of gaps in the information and data. So the more people we can get out there monitoring, the better. So we thought it'd just be useful just to run through very quickly what our results have shown since we've started. We've only been doing it 2 or 3 years, but the results that we've got so far. So one of the things that we've also done actually is commissioned an ecologist to do a white-clawed crayfish survey. And you might say, well, why do you want to get a white-clawed crayfish survey done through Wotton? But as Simon mentioned, there are a lot of species, freshwater species, that are in really, really steep decline. And the white-clawed crayfish is a really interesting invertebrate. It's our only native crayfish. It's quite big for considering the size of other invertebrates in the water. It is quite limited in its distribution because it has to live in streams that are very calcareous, because it needs the calcium from the water to build its exoskeleton. And it's a really good indicator of streams that have got good quality. So we were quite interested because we knew there had been white-clawed crayfish in the streams 15 or 20 years ago. There was a report that was done. And since then, they've been in really, really steep decline. And they're listed as an endangered species, and they're on the UK government's list of Section 41 protected species. And that means you can't even handle them. You're not allowed to pick them up. You're not allowed to trap for them. You're not allowed to trap for any crayfish. And you have to be very careful with stream management to make sure that you don't damage their habitats. So we were really interested to see if we still had them in Wotton. So an ecologist came out in May and did a survey right through from Kingswood right up to Holywell Lees. We didn't have time to go further than that. And we were really, really pleased because we found that we had got a really good, healthy population. And we didn't find any signal crayfish. Now, one of the reasons that crayfish are in steep decline is because they're at the mercy of an invasive species of crayfish called the signal crayfish, which is an American import. And these carry the crayfish plague, which doesn't kill them, but does kill white-clawed crayfish. Very sadly, about 10 days ago, I got a video of somebody who had found a crayfish down at Brown's Piece, and we're interested to know what it was, and it was a signal crayfish. So they are starting to come upstream, which is a bit of a shame. So anyway, we have to watch that space on that one. But I was going to show you a couple of pictures to actually really to show the difference between white-clawed crayfish and signal crayfish, because people get them very easily confused. So this was just the survey that we did in May. The picture on the left shows everybody out looking for crayfish using this sort of orange telescope thing, which has got a lens at the bottom of it, and you just put that into the water and you look through it like a big diving mask, and you can see the white-clawed crayfish or whatever else is on the bottom. So that was quite fun. That actually was down in Kingswood. We didn't find any white-clawed crayfish there, but we did find a European eel, so that was quite exciting. So that was really nice. And then the picture on the right is a picture of a white-clawed crayfish, indeed. That came out of the stream at Water Lane. So we found quite a lot there. We found quite a lot going on up through Marchese Walk as well. The lower end by the road at Marchese Walk. So that was all really good news, and the ecologist was really excited. He hadn't seen a white-clawed crayfish for a while, so that was great. But then, moving on, so this is our enemy number one. This is the signal crayfish. People get them quite confused because you can see from the picture on the left, they do actually have quite distinctive white claws. And that one is huge. That is a Jack Russell nose there, and the signal crayfish was prepared to take the Jack Russell on. He wasn't going to run away. But when they flip their pincers back, you can very clearly see the red underneath. Interestingly, the ecologist said, because there is, I've always heard that if you see a signal crayfish and you're certain that it's a signal crayfish, you should kill it. He actually said if you have big crayfish like that, it's better to leave them, because if you take one big one out, it'll be replaced by sort of 15 or 20 little ones. And if you've got a big healthy one that's not carrying the plague, then it's probably better than 15 or 20 little ones. So I think the jury's out on that slightly, but yeah. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Eric, who's just going to spend 5 minutes talking about the monitoring results from the river fly and the chemical monitoring we've been doing.
Thank you, Belle. I'm a volunteer with the Climate Action Network, and I'm one of about 8 people who a couple of years ago undertook some training with Bart to do the riverfly monitoring. And we were looking for riverfly larvae, as Simon mentioned. So we work in generally as pairs, and we've got these monitoring sites. So we monitor at 100 Acer Wood, Holywell Lees, Water Lane, Park Mill Farm, down at Nin Nature Reserve, and Marley's Brook. So here we are doing the monitoring. There's a couple of our volunteers here, and we have to do it in a prescribed way. You kick sample, collecting downstream using a net for 3 minutes, and that's all quite strict. We adhere to that, and this is what we're looking for. We're looking for these fly larvae. Here's a mayfly larva, and what we do is we separate them out and we count them, and we apportion points depending on how many of each species we find. As I say, it's a standard technique, and here's some of the results we've achieved over the last 2 years or so. So this is going more or less from upstream sort of to downstream, and one of the points someone mentioned was that the water quality looks better downstream, and this is typically what we're sort of seeing, really. The red lines are the action levels, so if the level drops below that, we alert Army, and they get us to do a repeat sample. And the idea is that some action is taken if it goes below the level. One of the lowest areas, the action level was set quite low at Water Lane, and the recent sampling we did there, we only achieved a reading of 4 for that site, and sadly to say, we found more wet wipes in the sample than species counted. So that's a pretty poor show, really. One of the other things we're doing, the Climate Action Network has got a photometer, which is a method of doing a chemical measurement of nutrients. And as we've heard already from Simon, nutrient runoff and nutrients, phosphates coming from sewage pollution, that's all bad if the levels go up a certain level. Now, I've picked up these numbers. I hope they're correct, but I understand the government guidance is really, for good quality water, it's got to be below 30 milligrams per litre of nitrate and below 0.1 milligram per litre of phosphate. And you can see here that there are some, I think that's an anomaly, that measurement there. We've only just started doing this, so we're sort of learning ourselves, really. But there are some areas where the levels are really quite high, and this typically is Water Lane, and that was taken on the same day as that poor sample. Interestingly, up at 100 Acer Wood, there's an out-of-spec measurement there as well, over the limit. So I don't know what that's down to, but it's quite interesting. So, as I say, this is just starting off. We're just starting off doing this measurement, and hopefully in the fullness of time, we should be able to get more measurements to support what's going on. Simon mentioned the combined sewage overflows, and legally these are allowed to overflow in periods of storm conditions. Well, this is data, I don't know if you can see that from the back, but this is data from just the year 2022. And the old coach yard combined sewage overflow, there were 22 events for a combination of 10.8 hours. And this was supposedly a sensor failure. Water Lane, 19 events, 11.73 hours. And this is untreated sewage flowing over into the river. Hack Mill, 19 events over 11, nearly 12 hours. And apparently that's supposedly an ongoing investigation. The good news is Brickfield's combined sewage overflow, no events recorded in 2022. So, from my point of view, doing this work, we hope it's going to mean something, and we hope somebody's going to do something about it, because it's a bit of a shame the water company's not here to talk to us.
Claire's very kindly agreed to talk to us about beavers and their impact on river systems. Claire is a senior advisor from Natural England with a specialism in mammals. Claire.
But yeah, I'm Claire. My day job is senior specialist for mammals at Natural England. Natural England, for those of you who don't know, we're basic conservation advisors to the government. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. And I've been working on beavers for the last 3 years now, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what beavers are, where we are in England, and then a little bit about the positive impacts they can have and the potential conflicts that they can have as well. Start off with a little crowd pleaser. So, beavers, Eurasian beaver, they're the second largest rodent in the world. Anyone know what the largest rodent is? Capybara, there we go. So there's two species. We've got the Eurasian beaver and the North American beaver. They can't interbreed, different levels of chromosomes. They're semi-aquatic. They don't like moving away from water at all. And they live in family groups and territories along the river banks. They tend to be sort of active most in the evenings and overnight time. In the summer, you can see them as this one on the River Otter, out, quite clearly in those long summer evenings. And they're big. They're really quite big. 25 kilograms as adults. So a little bit of history. We did just have beavers. We had beavers all over the place. But they all disappeared, and this was primarily due to hunting for their fur, which I'll talk about a little bit in a moment, and also the secretion from their castor glands, castoreum, which was used in medicine and perfume and things like that. But also habitat loss. You took away the beaver, then you gained a lot of this wetland habitat for agriculture and things like that. So you can see there was a really massive decline all the way across Europe. In Britain, we lost them somewhere between the 12th and the 16th centuries. And the population, we think, in Europe went down to as little as 1,200 individuals. So this is the picture now, which is obviously much better. They're really a conservation success story in Europe through proactive reintroductions, natural dispersal. Europe's done a lot better than we have. You'll see that little green blob in the middle. Some people got a bit keen to bring beavers back and weren't too careful about where they got them from. So these are the North American beavers, and they tend to outcompete our Eurasian beaver. But you can't really get rid of them or tell the difference. They're very difficult to tell apart in the field. So we are one of the last countries really to reintroduce this species in Europe. So the current situation in England, the interest in bringing back beaver kind of grew since the 1990s, and this resulted in beavers being brought into England and kept in fenced naturalistic enclosures because you weren't allowed to release them into the wild. So we've got about 45 of these enclosures at the moment, which are the black dots. We've got about 45 of them. But escapes from these enclosures, as well as unauthorised releases, have resulted in as many as 7 wild free-living populations in England that you can see with the green squares on the map. And this uncoordinated approach to beaver reintroduction has kind of resulted in these disjointed populations across England. The only authorised population, if you want to call it that, is the River Otter down in Devon, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I just want to give a little bit of a background to where we are. So the Scots really kind of got us started in 2009. They did a formal beaver reintroduction trial in Knapdale, which you may have heard of. And at a similar time, beavers were also found to be living in Tayside over in Perthshire in the wild there as well. Beavers were legally protected in Scotland in 2019. In England, beavers were found to be noted to be breeding on the River Otter down in Devon in 2013. The response of the government to this was to come in and remove them because they didn't know where they'd come from. There's a perceived disease risk. But this was met by quite a big outcry from locals and the Wildlife Trust. So the government agreed to permit a formal 5-year reintroduction trial. That concluded in 2020. And then we assessed that, which is that report, and made a recommendation to the government. which did result in ministers agreeing to let the beavers stay and to expand their range naturally. So this was the first, I always get this wrong, legally sanctioned reintroduction of an formerly extinct native mammal species to England. So it's quite a big moment. But then it got the government thinking about, okay, we've got these beavers on the River Otter, what happens next? So they did a consultation in 2021. This was to gauge people's views about beavers and, you know, what goes on. So we did the evidence review there. We did a load of work about management, licensing frameworks, etc. In 2022, the government announced the result of that consultation, but they didn't provide a clear steer. They just said they would continue to work with us as Natural England to work with future releases and management and something like that. So it wasn't hugely helpful. And then in October 2022, beavers became legally protected. So that means they're now protected from killing, disturbance. You can't destroy their lodges or anything like that. So about beaver biology. So they are a prey species. They're used to being eaten by wolves and bears and all these things that we don't have anymore. But if you see it swimming in the water there, you can see how its eyes and its ears are right on the top of its head, so it can kind of keep a lookout. It's very well adapted to aquatic life. It's got this the webbed hind paws, and then its fur, its downfall really, because it's so dense and soft and waterproof. And they've got this special grooming claw on their hind foot to keep it in good condition. So they're quite cumbersome on land. They normally walk on 4 legs, but they can waddle along on their hind legs when they're carrying something, which is quite funny to see. They've got very dexterous front paws, which you'll see in a moment in the river, in the next video. Their teeth are, if you've ever seen a picture of beavers, they've got orange teeth. They've got iron in them. They're very, very strong. They're very sharp. They're obviously developed for gnawing down trees. And then their tail, the main function of that is fat storage. And you can tell how good a condition the beaver's in by the shape of the tail. So you can see, just watch its front paws. It's like, they're really like little hands, and they just sort of grab that and then look at it go. I love this. So that's willow there. They love willow. They love willow, aspen, but they'll eat a really wide variety of foods. And then off it goes. So to talk a little bit about beavers. So you may have heard them mentioned their keystone species, their ecosystem engineers. What does that mean? Basically means that they're the glue that holds a habitat together. They can modify the habitat around themselves to suit their needs. You can see this beaver wetland here, and if I go on to the next slide, it's a very dynamic habitat. It's changing all the time. So these are, as they're moving through the wetland habitat, they're creating these little channels. We've got standing deadwood, which is, you know, great for birds, for insects, for bats. We've also got, if I go back here, we've got fallen deadwood as well, and as Simon was saying, that woody debris in a river system, it creates that complexity, it creates fish refugia. It's a really important feature to have in our waterways. And what they'll do, because they don't like to spend a long time away from water, they'll create these little channels through the wetlands, so they don't have to ever be far away from water, so they'll create these foraging channels through, which means that it's always moving, always changing. So I'll chat a little bit more about the particular features and aspects of beavers that are so interesting and change the environment around us. So first one is foraging. I mean, everyone knows beavers fell trees, don't they? It's quite hard work to fell a tree. They do that because they like the bark, they like the leaves, they also use it in construction for their dams. But they don't always fell every single tree. Like I say, they tend to coppice a lot, and you can see that picture there. Most of the species that the beavers eat, they've co-evolved with them, and they will coppice readily. And the beaver will have a little nibble. You can see on this one, I think this is from the Avon actually, Bristol Avon. These are really old gnawerings, and then it's sprung up again, and the beaver will kind of come along and have a little nibble a bit later on again. But by the felling of the trees, they also open up the habitat, they let light in, they change the structure of the woodland, they let new species come up as well. So it's that dynamism that kind of complex habitat that's really good. So it's creating that diverse woodland structure. But dams is obviously, everyone knows they build dams as well. And these are my poor kids that I drag away on holiday to beaver dams. They splash around. But all these are pictures of dams in England. So some are in the wild, some are in enclosures. Why do beavers build dams? There's a couple of reasons. One of them is to store water, to create deep pools, to protect their lodge, where they keep their babies, where they feel safe, their central kind of point. And those dams are going to be quite well constructed, quite well protected. But they'll also create more temporary dams to create access to foraging areas. So they might temporarily flood out an area so they can gain access to some food. And then, once that food source is gone, they'll move on somewhere else. So dams can hang around for different times, and they can be constructed of all sorts of different ways as well. And here's another picture as well. So this is on the River Otter down in Devon. This one you may have seen. This is Cropton Forest. I know they like to publicise it. It's huge. I couldn't find a picture of someone stood in front of it. It's well over my head. And Cropton is an enclosure by Forestry England. And what they were doing there is that the village downstream kept being flooded, and they were putting on all these woody debris dams, these natural flood management that we were talking about before. And they were like, actually, we're going to try a different method. We're going to put some beavers in. And this is what they did, and you can see the result. Down on the River Otter, so as part of the River Otter trial, they monitored a lot of the dams that were built there. And over 5 years, there were 215 dams, but only a handful persisted more than 1 year. So you can see there's a lot of change that's going on there. Dams are really important for storing water. They increase that top up of groundwater. They spread the water out in the environment. It filters down to the groundwater below. That can then be cooled, and then it can kind of pop up downriver depending on the system there, and keep rivers cool that way. Dams, the pools behind them, can create refuges for animals in hot weather as well, that we've seen. These really kind of the hot weather we've had, what beavers are doing all the time is they're swimming around, they're keeping those waterways clear, and we're finding that fish have actually moved into them because it's too hot for fish, in the other parts of the river. So they're using kind of these beaver wetlands as a cooler area. The dams are really important creating these wetland habitats, and we see a real boost in numbers of many, many other species that, co-evolved and would have lived alongside beavers. So we see loads and loads of frog spawn, amphibians, grass snakes. Great for bats because the insect numbers go sky high. Great for birds, lots of water voles. Water voles have benefited a lot because, as you may know, water vole numbers have decreased dramatically due to American mink. But because these habitats are so complex, it's much harder for mink to kind of track down and eat every single water vole. It's not like a linear sort of river feature. So it's shown that they can kind of have a little stronghold there as well. So that was great teamwork by those little beavers there, wasn't it? So a little bit of science as well. So this was a study carried out by Alan Puttick at Exeter University. And he was studying an enclosure site called Boldventure down in Devon. And it's the headwaters of the River Tamar, and it's surrounded by agricultural land. So it's like your typical cattle, sheep, ryegrass, few crops, etc. So he had all these monitors. He monitored the water going in, the flow rates going in, the flow rates going out. And it's quite clear that you can see from the graph there, this is the rain, and this is the water sort of coming in, and this is the water going out. So it is slowing the flow. It's keeping the water back. It's holding it on the floodplain for longer, pushing it sideways. And he found that the time that the water takes to leave the site is much, much slower, and this effect persisted even after after the heavy rainfall effects and onwards as well. So again, people downstream have really benefited from this because the flood risk has gone a lot down, lower. But obviously this is an enclosure site. They've got the space for the beavers here, but one thing that we do have to kind of accept is that beavers, when they are building their dams, they do flood and create these wetlands, and that can cause conflict in certain areas, because the farmer might need to plant to their field, or it might block an access track or something like that. So even though the people downstream are really benefiting from the effects of these beaver dam, the landowner itself may not be. So there's this imbalance, and this is where we need to kind of create ways of encouraging coexistence with beavers, creating space for them, making it financially viable through agri-environment schemes, through green finance. And I went off a little bit of a tangent there because I haven't talked about sediment either, so sorry. But again, sediment, so as Simon mentioned in his talk, huge runoff from fields. And you can just see, there's a graph, but you can see the pictures as well from the water, the amount of sediment that's flowing in. And then it's stored, because the water is slowed, the sediment drops out of the system into the beaver pools, and then it's much, much cleaner when it's leaving. Which is really great, but it's important not to forget that the best thing would be for it not to be flowing into the water course at all. So it is really looking at that land management system as well around these beaver dams. The last activity that I wanted to talk about was burrowing and lodge building. So beavers are really, really good diggers. Which many people don't realise. This here, if you can just see it, that's a burrow in the Forest of Dean enclosure. The water was clearly clear, so you could see it. But there are burrows all over the place. They dig all over the place. So they'll have little refuges, but they'll also have their lodges as well. So this is a lodge over at Spain's Hall in Essex. And what normally happens is that they dig a little burrow, they expand it to form a chamber. And if they decide that's where they want to kind of have their babies and their main house, they'll expand that a bit more, and then the roof falls in. So then they kind of stick mud and sticks over the top, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is what they really want to protect. So they'll have a series of dams around it to keep that water level high, because as I mentioned, they're a prey species. They don't want to come out and be eaten by a bear, which, you know, they're pretty safe here. But I did go out to Romania actually, and saw a whole sort of beaver dam and lodge torn apart by bears. So you can see why they want to worry about it. But the burrowing, it can create weakness in riverbanks. It can release sediment into the river as well. So that can be good because it creates a more dynamic river habitat, a more meandering flow, renaturalize the river. But it can also cause erosion where you might not want erosion, and cause a sort of a health and safety consideration as well. So that's something else that we just need to be mindful of. I really just put in, it's got loads of text in it, don't expect you to read it. It's mainly to remind myself that I haven't forgotten anything, but it's a study by Rich Brazier at Exeter University. He did a really big literature review and evidence review of all the benefits that beavers can have. And you can see there's really wide ranging, so some of the ones I've talked about. But also the human beaver impacts, and this is where a lot of my work is spent, is trying to get people used to living alongside the species. Again, we've lived without it for a very long time. Our habitats have changed, completely. So there's going to be places where there's going to be conflict, and it's how best we manage that conflict. And that's why within Natural England, we've got this mitigation and management strategy. We've got licenses. We do training so people understand, in fact, Simon's been on the training, how to manage beaver dams, when you can manage them, and how to assist landowners, and then really how to encourage beavers and promote their benefits in the right areas. A lot of that can be done by making space, by creating these river buffers. Most of the impacts of beavers are within 20 metres of a river corridor, and if we can provide a bit more space around our waterways, then that will go a huge way along to mitigating a lot of these impacts. And then I couldn't not include this video. So we use camera traps a lot for monitoring, particularly in enclosures, because they're really difficult animals to monitor. They're very secretive. So within enclosures, it's quite hard to even know if you've got kits or not. So So yeah, we do have a lot of sort of camera trap footage, which is really good. And that's me. So thank you very much for listening.